Hi everyone, I am Mamta. I am the Senior Executive for Workplace Harassment and Discrimination Advisory at AWARE Singapore. AWARE is Singapore's largest and leading gender equality advocacy group. We also have a sexual assault care center that works with survivors of tech-facilitated sexual violence. And so I'll be sharing a little bit of insights into the statistics and experiences that we have working with some of the survivors. So to begin with, what we see is that since 2016, we've seen a steady rise, not only in sexual violence cases, but specifically technology-facilitated sexual violence cases. It started off with 47, leading up to 140 cases in 2019. Now, this is important to note that not only have cases risen steadily, but the percentage of tech-facilitated cases out of our total sexual violence cases have also gone up. I'll break down the type of technology-facilitated cases that we've seen. So we start off with image-based sexual violence, which stands at 39%. We define image-based as the non-consensual creation, obtainment, and/or distribution of intimate, nudes, or sexual private images and/or videos. Then we have 29% of cases where there was unwanted and explicit sexual messages and calls. Now, the use of technology by a perpetrator to facilitate unwanted sexual contact is considered under this bracket. Now, this can include explicit, coercive, and sexually harassing messages as well. Now, in terms of other cases we see where there was non-harassing messages, but that eventually led to sexual abuse, we consider that under examples of dating apps as well as ride-hailing apps, and that stands at 15%. And then in 17% of cases, we see that there were multiple forms of abuse, and this can be image-based plus unwanted and explicit sexual messages, or it could be dating apps, for example, combined with image-based sexual violence. We see a range of TFSV cases in Singapore, with the first one being revenge porn. Now, I know Sophie spoke a little bit about this already, but essentially revenge porn is images and/or videos created or obtained with consent, but distributed non-consensually. We also see sexual voyeurism cases where images are non-consensually obtained and/or created. And in some cases, it also includes distribution of these videos. We also see sextortion, where there are threats involved to create and/or distribute such images and videos. While we call it sextortion because oftentimes there is a demand for sex or relationship, in some cases we also see that there is blackmail involved, so it can be extortion for money, for example. Or it could be threats to cause emotional and/or psychological distress. And then we see the other types of cases that would involve unwanted calls or unwanted messages. But in other cases, we also see that sometimes photos are digitally altered and/or accompanied by personal details of victim survivors. So where does the blame lie? Obviously with our perpetrators, but oftentimes what we see is that the blame is put on women. And we focus on women's behaviors rather than putting the onus or questioning the actions and behaviors of the perpetrator itself. So what are some types of victim blaming comments that we see, or what are the types of victim blaming attitudes that we see? One, we blame the victim directly for experiencing sexual abuse in the first place. Second, we see that the harm experienced by survivors is often downplayed. And then third, we see that people assume that sexual violence only happens to certain kind of women. There is clearly a double standard, and that's a question we should all be asking. How is this double standard actually showing up when it comes to tech-facilitated sexual violence? I'll go through the types of victim blaming attitudes or comments one by one. So the first one obviously is to blame the victim's behavior. This often comes out when we see people questioning why she's engaging in sexual behavior. Why did she choose to share these pictures in the first place? Maybe she should be dressed more decently. or if you're so-called sexualizing yourself on social media, people somehow have a right to do what they're doing because you've put yourself out there. The use of technology also, we see that people will question why she had to even post such a picture in the first place, or why she had to post such a video in the first place, or that the woman should have known better because you picked this guy to send these videos to, or it was your choice to send these videos or images in the first place. So it is your responsibility to now deal with the effects of it. We also see that the harm is downplayed. First of all, we see that TFSV is not as harmful as sexual assault or harassment, and this is not true. I'll talk a little bit more about this later in my presentation, but it is very distressing and concerning to hear comments such as, at least she wasn't raped, or now we're considering images to be rape, or we somehow downplay the negative behaviors or comments that boys will make, such as, come on, dick pics are a little bit of harmless fun, what's the harm in it? Or that bad sexual etiquette is not a sexual crime. Oftentimes, we hear people say that tech-facilitated sexual violence is a victimless crime, and this often tends to happen in sexual voyeurism cases, for example, where the claim or the analogy is that victims don't even know that they have been upskirted to begin with, or it's not like we've sent their images or videos to people they know. Third, sexual violence only happens to certain kinds of women. Again, it ties a little bit into the first point I brought up, where we consider that only attractive women's photos are shared against their will on porn sites, or Sophie brought up OnlyFans, and so I wouldn't dig too much into that, but essentially the questioning comes, why did she have an account on OnlyFans to begin with? She put herself in that position. We'll talk about now who's doing the victim blaming. First and foremost, it is people who are in your close proximity, so people you consider in your personal territory, for example, friends, colleagues, family members, or people on your social media who are commenting on your pictures to begin with. Research has also proven that men are more likely to victim blame than women are. Similarly, research has also proven that heterosexual men are more likely to victim blame than gay men. Let's talk a little bit about the effects of victim blaming comments. And this is not just the effects on survivor victims themselves, but it also extends outward and impacts different mechanisms such as reporting or addressing tech-facilitated sexual violence as a core issue. So when it comes to survivors, psychological harm is one of the biggest impacts that we see, where it often leads to depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. It also tends to impact the education, employment, and future relationships of victims. Some research has shown that oftentimes victims sometimes may leave their jobs or quit their jobs to heal or deal with what has happened to them, or they lose trust in relationships, and that becomes a struggle going forward. It also undermines reporting behavior, and this refers to not only police reporting, but essentially it also refers to reporting so that she can seek help or obtain any resources. We also see that overall, on a broader scale, this is an issue, one, because it determines which sexual crimes are taken seriously, and then based on this, we see that tech-facilitated sexual violence is often seen as inferior to other sexual violence cases. It also contributes to objectification and dehumanization of women. For example, women are often referred to as content. So the effects extend outward and not just to the survivor itself. And this is key, because if we want to address tech-facilitated sexual violence, we have to first recognize it as an issue and recognize the impact it's having. So something that we've observed is that women have chosen to adapt their behaviors to protect themselves or to try and avoid any form of tech-facilitated abuse occurring. Now, although it may seem like a good thing that they're actively hiding their identities or they're trying to avoid verbal communication with others, it actually speaks to a larger problem that the onus should not be on women to protect themselves online. Rather, the focus and the question should be, what are we doing to hold perpetrators accountable and ensure that this type of abuse is not occurring to begin with? So what tools do we need to address victim blaming? First and foremost, we see the need and importance of comprehensive sexuality education, specifically the importance of acquiring knowledge on consent. Oftentimes in cases, we see that pictures or images may be shared with consent, but it is often distributed non-consensually, or we obtain pictures and videos non-consensually to begin with. Understanding the concept of consent is fundamental, especially when it comes to schools where we start building that early on. And then this would come in with digital literacy, where we understand how to be posting these pictures, what is right, what is wrong online, what are we not supposed to do, what type of behavior is appropriate, what is not appropriate. And then similar to what Sophie brought up about OnlyFans, educating them about the role public versus private accounts play. So if something is posted on the private account, it does not give anybody the right to actually take those images or share images. It's not consent to actually share or obtain these images or videos. We also see that with point number 3, we see that the digital technologies have been integrated into our daily lives. They don't actually exist on a separate plane. And so now what we do need to do is move beyond the false dichotomy of offline and online behaviors. And lastly, we need to challenge toxic masculinity behaviors, such as some of those that I addressed before. We need to focus on the actions of perpetrators or not downplaying the behaviors of men that might be toxic masculinity. This is all I have. And so I will stop here.
Yeah, thank you, Mamta.